Well, the union budget announcement came in today. The finance minister making sort of history by announcing her seventh consecutive union budget. But what was in it, really? That's the question we're asking. Now, I've put out a video earlier today just breaking down the main takeaways, but we're going to go further now in this conversation because we have the experts with us. Joining me right now is Professor Arun Kumar. He's a retired professor of economics and he's an author and a voice that I respect greatly when it comes specifically to economics, developmental economics, jobs, something we've talked about a great deal as well. Professor Kumar, good evening, and thank you for making time for my audience and myself today.
Thank you.
I just want to, take it piece by piece. The finance minister started off by basically saying that the main constituencies that they want to look at are women, the poor, the farmers, and young people. Was there anything specific for these four constituencies within that budget? Because other than those broad strokes, we didn't see any specific new announcement.
No, announcements have been there. You see, we must look at the budget not just in terms of announcements, but in terms of allocations. So the part A of the budget speech always is a lot of, announcements for every segment: tribals, Dalits, women, farmers, everybody who's in trouble. Now, in 75 years, if we'd taken care of them, then these problems would not have existed. So typically what has happened is that what is announced is not implemented. Now, this budget has come in the light of the election results that have come, where the ruling party has not done as well as it expected to do. It's in power as a coalition. So it's taking care of its coalition partners, no doubt. But it's also realized that the problem of farmers, problem of unemployment is huge. And that's why in North India especially, it did not cut much ice, what they have been doing. And therefore, they needed to reprioritize. So therefore, they have said that they have 9 priorities. If you look at the beginning of the speech, there are 9 priorities that they have said. So while they say there are 4 castes, like you said, women, farmers, etc., but there are 9 priorities. The first amongst them is agriculture, because agriculture is 48% of the employment in the economy, right? So it's a huge chunk. Now, maybe 60% depend, but 46% are workers in the out of the working force, 46% are in agriculture. So you have to take care of them. Now, therefore, they have said, okay, we have taken care of them. We have done this. We are doing, going to make crops more resilient because there's extreme weather events. These extreme weather events are causing, a drop in the output. And it's true. The output that the government gives out is probably not the correct data. Because if you look at last year, they said that we have a record output of food grains. And then they had to ban the export of food grains, first wheat and then paddy, and still the prices rose. What it means is that the data on the output of agriculture is not correct, and therefore the distress of the farmers is greater than what the record output suggests. So therefore, in a sense, they had to do something. So they've announced various things in agriculture. But the point is, how much are they allotting? They've allotted 1.52 lakh crores. It seems like a huge number, right? But 1.52 lakh crores is barely 3% of the budget of almost 48 lakh crores, right? Now, farming community itself is 46% of the workforce, at least 65% dependent on it, and 15% of the output. So it's a very tiny allocation to the agriculture sector. Okay, it's not a huge sector. Secondly, if your priority is changing, then compared to the interim budget on 1st February, you should have allotted much more, but you haven't done that. Compared to last year, you should have allotted much more, but you haven't done that, right? So where is the reprioritization of agriculture? How are you going to take advantage of that? Second priority, this is employment, because the youth, especially the educated youth and women, the labor force participation rate is very poor for women, and unemployment is huge amongst the educated youth. We've seen all these crowds at the Air India recently. We saw in Gujarat recently, earlier for the railway, for the police exam in UP, 46 lakh applied for 60,000 jobs. Railway stations were crowded, the bus stands were crowded, and then the exam was cancelled. So we've seen huge problem, NEET exam cancelled, the CUET, UG results not coming out, and so on. So youth is in deep trouble. He's very frustrated. So therefore, you needed to do something about their employment. Now you've announced various things. You said that we will have apprenticeship, we will have, internship, But the question is that, okay, you have 1 year internship or you have apprenticeship for 1 or 2 years, but then if there are no jobs after that, where will this youth go? So you need to generate jobs.
Also,
Okay.
Professor Kumar, they did, I mean, the fact that the apprenticeship is also in the formal sector, and the challenge is right now in the informal sector, the gig economy, people who aren't able to find entry into that formal sector at all. Are we missing that, the real challenge altogether with these, with the solutions that have been offered?
So that you're absolutely right. We need to create jobs in the unorganized sector, but they're offering these apprenticeships, etc., in the 500 top companies, etc. So maybe some people from the informal sector will also be able to do apprenticeship there, maybe some internship there, etc. But after that, where do they go? Because the organized sector is not generating jobs. Organized sector is getting more and more mechanized, more and more automated. For instance, somebody was telling me from Maruti that earlier they used to produce one car with 10 robots and 10 workers in 58 seconds. Now they use 20 robots and 5 people and produce one car in 38 seconds. So therefore, production may go up in the organized sector, but the employment is not going to go up. In banking sector, earlier we used to go and do everything inside the bank branch. Now you don't have to go to the bank branch. You can do it on your mobile phone. You can do it on your computer. So the work of the banks has increased thousandfold, but the employment has become half. So therefore, organized sector is not going to provide the employment that is required, and that's why the focus has to be on the unorganized sector. And the unorganized sector is agriculture, and it is micro sector. Micro sector in the MSME sector employs 97.5% of the MSME employment. So you have to promote the micro sector, but instead you've damaged the micro sector. First, the micro and the small sector got damaged by the demonetization, then by the faulty GST, then the next year by the NBFC crisis, and finally the lockdown and the pandemic. So therefore, allocations have to be increased for labor-intensive areas. Now, are we increasing allocation for labor-intensive areas? We did not do that in the budget in February 1, and we still don't do it. The Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is the one that the rural people use, that has 86,000 crores of allocation in the earlier interim budget, and still 86,000 crores. So in real terms, it's declining, right? So in real terms, you have to increase it if you want to offer more employment under the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Then the other big employment areas are education and health. Are you increasing allocations in real terms in education and health? You're not doing that. On health, what you allotted, you didn't spend. And therefore, now you're spending barely 1% more than what you allotted last time, which means in real terms, correcting for inflation, it's going down by about 5%. Similarly, in education, you're not allotting a hugely much fund. So therefore, the labor intensive areas where the allocation should be much more, that is not happening. So that's why I'm saying the reprioritization of the budget to take care of the problem of the farmers, to take care of the problem of the youth, the employment, etc., that is not coming.
In fact, Professor, in the government's own economic survey, it was acknowledged that AI or artificial intelligence casts a long shadow over our entire job scenario, which is already, as we know, in bad shape. Besides, the entire gig economy sector that we have right now is effectively taking away worker rights because they are not formal workers. Does there seem, in your opinion, any intention here to solve these problems?
That's what I'm saying. We needed reprioritization to solve these problems. But the reprioritization is not being visible, because reprioritization would have meant that as compared to last year's budget, our allocation should have been very different. As compared to the interim budget, which was the pre-election budget, our should have been reprioritized. So firstly, if you look at the total amount of expenditure, 48 lakh crore, that's barely above the inflation, in the 1 year period, So if we want to reprioritize, we have to increase expenditures on these critical areas, either by cutting down on something or by raising more resources and spending more on this. We don't see either of them. So therefore, to say that this budget is going to take care of the critical problems of the economy, of the women, of the educated youth, of agriculture, that doesn't seem to be happening in this budget. So it's a lot of show. It's not real content. Real content would be in terms of allocations, in terms of greater allocations and greater prioritization of these areas. That to me is not visible. Even the Northeast, for instance, the Northeast was mentioned, but if you look at the allocation in the interim budget and last year, exactly the same allocation as this year. So therefore, in real terms, it's declined by the rate of inflation, which is about 5% or thereabouts.
Professor Kumar, there's also, I wanted to ask you about capital expenditure. We understand is unchanged from the interim budget when the government, this was a government that pushed capital expenditure a great deal in the last few years and also encouraged the private sector to come match this expenditure, come and invest, come and have faith. There wasn't that much of, we didn't hear a lot of that echo this time. What do you think is different and why has the capital expenditure not moved?
So you see, 11.11 lakh crore, which is a magic figure because 11, 1.11115 times, is what was the magic figure that was mentioned. That was already a step up of about 30% over the last years. So that's a substantial increase. However, the point is that this 11.111 lakh crore is going to capital intensive areas. It is going for railway freight corridors, it is going for highways, it is going for power sector. Mostly it's going in those areas which are not going to generate jobs. Earlier, if you saw a road project or a railway construction project, you'd see hundreds of workers working. Now with big tractors and cranes and so on, you see hardly 10 people working. So directly these capital intensive areas will not generate many jobs. What you needed to do was spend on rural development. Now rural development budget is not going up very much. It's hardly going up inflation adjusted. Where in the rural development projects you can do small projects, have more labor employment rather than big machines being used to do that. So my take is that this 11.11 lakh crore also needs to be remodeled because the organized sector has enough capital. Its balance sheets are very good. Once the demand picks up, they'll automatically start investing. Why is the organized sector not investing more? It's not investing more because demand is short. And why is demand short? Because the unorganized sector, the 94% of the workforce, they don't have enough purchasing power. And because they don't have enough purchasing power, they're not buying enough. And that's why consumption as a share of GDP is falling. Consumption rate of growth in the GDP is only at about 3.5%, 4%, whereas GDP is supposed to be growing at 7%. So consumption share of GDP is going down. What it means is demand is short, and that's why the organized sector capacity utilization data which the RBI puts out, that shows it's hovering between 70 and 75%. And because it's hovering between 70 and 75%, if you produce 100 cars and you're selling only 70 cars, why would you increase capacity to 110? So you would not invest more. So unless capacity utilization goes up to 85% or more, you're not going to start investing more. So at the present situation, there are some sectors where investment will be more, but in the aggregate, the investment of the private sector is not going to come more. So even though its balance sheet has improved, we gave a huge corporate tax concession in 2019. The government gave 1.6 lakh crore to the corporate sector, but the investment didn't pick up. Investment will pick up only when demand is there. If the demand is short, then investment is not going to pick up. So therefore, we need to redistribute income toward the lower segments, that's the unorganized sector. If we create employment there, if they get a productive work and they get a proper wage in agriculture, in the micro sector, then the demand in the economy will go up. If you give 100 rupees to a poor person, that entire 100 rupees will be spent. He'll buy some cloth for his wife, some school bag for the son, some, chappal for himself, some katori for the kitchen, Whereas if you give to the rich, the 5 rupees will be spent and 95 would be saved. So demand would not come. We are shifting income in favor of the well-off segments, away from the poor segments. That is the problem, and the budget should have addressed this problem.
In fact, inequality in India, according to some recent reports, said that it hasn't been this bad since the British Raj. We've actually gone back to those days. And there seems to be still a reluctance to tax the rich. But do you believe that the tax slab differences that we've seen, which we understand will result in a 17,500 rupees savings for a salaried professional, is that of any consequence in making any change on the ground?
This is another trick. Who's the middle class in India? You see, 9 crore people file tax return, right? Out of this, about 5 crore file nil return. They have an income below the taxable limit, okay? Then another 2.5 crore pay a very small amount of tax. And that's why the Prime Minister in his August 15 speech 2 years back said only effective taxpayers are only 1.5 crore out of 140 crore. That means 1.1% Indians are in the category of paying significant tax. They are the upper middle class and the rich. You can add to that another maybe this 5 crore people or so. So that's only about, say, another 3-4%. Okay. So those 3-4% are not going to be benefited by any tax concession. As it is today, you have to begin to pay tax at about 7 lakhs of rupees, okay, which means about 60,000 rupees per month of income. Okay, so therefore, any tax concession in direct taxes, a reduction, etc., will benefit hardly maybe about 2 or 3 crores of people out of 140 crore. So who's the middle class? Most of the middle class and the lower middle class is outside the tax net. Any concession in direct taxes, income tax doesn't benefit them. The benefit goes only to the better off middle class and the upper middle class and the rich. Okay, so what is it that the middle class is affected by? The indirect tax. On everything, you buy a chappal, you buy a shirt, you pay an indirect tax, right? So indirect taxes need to be reduced and direct taxes need to be raised. And this is an opportunity that is missed, because what is being shown is that only a net amount of 7,000 crores of tax is being raised. Now, 7,000 crores of tax being raised out of 4 crores, say, middle class people whose this thing will go down. So that comes to hardly about a few thousand rupees. 17,000 is the benefit to the person at the top end, whose marginal rate of tax may be 20% or so. Okay. But the others will benefit only on an average by 2,000-3,000 rupees. Now, so what you pay as your direct tax, income tax, may be 5%, but your indirect tax payment may be 15%. So if your indirect taxes are reduced, you benefit much more than if direct taxes are reduced. So we have to be very clear on who benefits from what. But I think the more important thing, what you are pointing to, was that wealth has increased enormously. And
Yes.
the wealth data comes from the white economy. The black economy data doesn't enter that picture. So a lot of real estate black and other black that is being generated is not in that data that Piketty and others have released. So inequality in wealth is much greater actually. Therefore, taxing the wealth is very important, because that reduces inequality. And when you spend it on the welfare schemes, then the incomes at the bottom end go up and the demand will go up. So there are two taxes that people talk about. One is the wealth tax for the current disparities, and inheritance tax for across generation disparities. So the two together will reduce inequality over a period of time, and that will result in greater demand and greater thing. And here I'm reminded of, say, Warren Buffett or other rich people in the US, who say that for capitalism to survive, the rich have to pay more taxes. Okay. So in 2012, he said this. He said, my secretary who earns $100,000 pays a higher tax rate than me because I get so many concessions. President Biden said just last year that there are 40 corporations earning billions of dollars. They pay no tax, which is whereas teachers and firefighters have to pay a tax. He said this is very unfair. So the rich get off by this. So therefore, the rich in America, in Italy, in Germany, in France, they supported this move of Warren Buffett that the rich have to pay more tax. He repeated this in 2018 and then in 2022 again. So we in India also, we must realize that the rich have become enormously rich. And we saw this wedding, this kind of a wedding in this country, where there's such vast poverty, it's a shame that you see something like this. So the rich can pay a lot more tax. They have the capacity, and that can be used for welfare schemes for the poor, so that there's a more equity. And I'm also reminded of Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, when the Model T car was produced in 1911, he said, why would I mass produce it unless my worker can buy the car? The rich will buy only a few cars. So therefore, the rich have to pay the taxes, and the workers have to have a higher income. In India, the e-Shram portal data tells you that 30 crore people are registered there according to the Prime Minister, and 94% say they're earning less than 10,000 rupees a month, which is close to the poverty line for the family. So therefore, we need to have more incomes in agriculture, in the micro sector, and then only will we be able to have higher demand, which will then boost the growth of the
I'll give you a second
economy.
to deal with
Yeah.
that phone. But I do want to ask you this now. There was a time I remember during UPA 1 and UPA 2 where there was a concern of populism in budget announcements, where the government closer to the election would just sort of begin giving away money. But here, the idea of the focus on Bihar and the focus on Andhra Pradesh, where Bihar and Andhra Pradesh have received the lion's share of the allotment to states, is this coalition politics? And do you think this will tip the scales even further in inequality? Is this something you agree with?
So, now what we must realize is the public is tired of waiting for development to take place. Our policies have been trickle down policies. that the top will develop and the trickle down will take place. Now the public doesn't believe the politicians. Public says, tell me, what are you giving me today? So
Yeah.
therefore, all parties in competitive politics, they are offering something or the other. Maharashtra is offering something, Karnataka is offering something, the central government is offered to the Kisan and the others. So various things are being offered, gas cylinder, this, that, and the other. But we must distinguish between what are these kind of giveaways and what are the public services that are necessary, like education, health, drinking water, and things like that, right? So the public is now demanding, and therefore the politicians are responding to that. But coming to the question of Andhra and Bihar, Andhra was split, and therefore the Hyderabad went away, and therefore the cash cow that was there went away, and therefore Andhra's finances are in trouble. Similarly, in the case of Bihar, where it was split, Jharkhand got all the minerals and so on. Bihar got this thing. So Bihar is the most backward state of the country. So there is a special case for these states to have some special help from the center. But the manner in which it is being done only now because there's coalition politics. Because for the survival of the government, it's necessary to keep Bihar and Andhra, happy. Now, this is where federalism gets dented, because federalism means that there are other poor states also that may need the same kind of treatment. So instead of being equitable among states, across states, what you're doing is giving special provision to that. Now, I'm told, I've not seen this in detail, but bulk of it is actually going to be probably coming from banks or from the multilateral agencies. Now, in that case, it would not get reflected in the budget. So I have not yet checked this, but I'm told that the funds may be coming from multilateral agencies rather than coming out of the budget state. But nonetheless, there are things that would come out of the budget for them, and that would reduce the inter-state equality that should be there in a federal structure.
Do you believe also that fundamentally this budget has maybe overlooked the main goals that we need to have in our country, which is to feed our children who are malnourished, to keep them in school, to improve education, to improve healthcare at the village level, from the tough lessons that we learned during the COVID pandemic? Have we again, the railways not receiving too much attention given the kind of infrastructure challenges our railways are facing, the accidents, the delays? Have we sort of, in an interest of making these big headlining announcements, missed out on the long-term goals?
See, we have been missing out on these long-term goals for the following reason. The unorganized sector has been damaged enormously. The demonetization, the GST, etc., as I mentioned earlier, and unorganized sector 94%. So unorganized sector is declining, and the organized sector is the one that's rising. So what's happening is that the demand is shifting from the unorganized to the organized sector, and therefore the incomes in the unorganized sector have stagnated and declined. So you see the organized sector rising at 7%, 8%. Unorganized sector is declining. You see the profits, what recently has been mentioned, profits of the organized sector rising 20%, 30%, and so on. So this split between the organized and unorganized is what is underlying the fact that people in the unorganized sector are not able to support themselves. And that's why there's a need to support them. Because if you don't support them with the food or with other things, then they're simply going to be a problem. So during the UPA regime, there was this idea of a safety net. This idea of safety net came in the World Bank idea in the 1980s. There's a book by Jolly and others which said that our policies are going to lead to greater poverty, people are going to slip down, and therefore we need a safety net. Now you can have a safety net for 5 or 10%, but you cannot have a safety net for 90%. That becomes a challenge. So in India, our challenge has been how to provide safety net, and that's why in the UPA 1 regime, we had the right to food and right to employment and various other things coming in, right to education, etc., that were announced then. So the point is that we need it. But when Mr. Modi came in 2014, he said this right to employment, etc., are bad. Rural employment guarantee scheme, etc., are bad because they shouldn't be there. So he was shifting the focus away from these safety net provisions, and his mind has been such that policies have not taken care of the poor. That's why when we say demonetization affected the unorganized sector. When we say GST and digitization, that affects the unorganized sector. So we're not taking care of them. So my argument has been that since the time of demonetization, the unorganized sector has been losing about 10 to 11 lakh crores every year. So in 8 years, they've lost about 80 to 90 lakh crores of rupees of income that could have accrued to them. Instead, what we have given them are mere palliatives of 3 to 4 lakh crores, either in food or gas or various other things. So in 8 years, they've got 24 lakh crores, but they've lost 80 to 90 lakh crores. So they are poorer than what they could have been. And that is the reason why there's a crisis. That is the reason why the poor are unable to take care of themselves and they are demanding that something be given to them immediately. So this is the problem with this budget also. The budget doesn't recognize that we have to make special provisions for the unorganized sector. We have to boost the incomes in agriculture because after all, 85% of the farmers are marginal farmers or small farmers cultivating less than 5 acres. So they need to be provided with better income, and that's why the demand for the minimum support price has been there. Then in the micro sector, there are 6 crore units employing about 12 crore people. So 97.5% of the employment of the MSME sector is in the micro sector. Now they need to be supported. Instead, they are being, by digitization and GST, etc. They are facing challenge and they are closing down in large numbers. That's why you have the unemployment problem, because that's where the bulk of the employment is. In agriculture, there's disguised unemployment. So those problems are not going away. The unemployment problem, and that's why you have problem, and that's why you have disparities, and because of disparities, shortage of demand. So we need to refocus towards the unorganized sector. That is not visible in this budget. So this budget is, in a sense, continuing along the same direction as the last 10 years budgets, rather than changing direction. And therefore, politically, situation is going to get worse because youth is protesting everywhere. I mean, let's not forget what's happened in Bangladesh or 2 years back in Sri Lanka, where the youth came out on the streets. If the situation gets worse, there'll be a social explosion. That's why the World Bank said safety net provisions are very important, because then otherwise there'll be social explosion. So we need to actually look at these things in a more sort of humanistic way, in a more inclusive way. So rather than give inclusive as a slogan, we actually need to include the unorganized sector and the poor in our development process.
Well, you did mention, of course, that when we were talking about inequality, that a large portion of black, possibly, deals are not being reflected in this data. What the finance minister chose to do today is remove some of the tax benefits from real estate when calculating long-term capital gains tax. There's no indexation anymore. For our audience, that basically means you'll be paying higher tax if you have sold a home or a piece of real estate after a longer period of time. And there is a calculation, we can get into that later. Do you believe this will encourage further black transactions?
No, there are two things that we need to consider. One is that today there's a huge amount of speculation going on in the economy. The stock markets are doing very well. The stock prices have risen, okay, and a lot of money is pouring in there. Now, if I can make 20-30% gains in a year through the stock market, then why would I invest in real term? Why would I invest in a small factory? A small factory would give me profit after 3 years and then to maybe 20% or so. So here I'm getting 20% return immediately. So therefore, there's a shifting away of investment, and that's why the investment also will not rise. Second is that short-term capital gains are speculative, long-term capital gains are not speculative. Those are held for investment purposes. So we must distinguish. And the long-term capital gain earlier used to be 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, and 20-year. Now it's 1 year. 1 year is also speculative. So I think what we needed to do was to have a higher short-term capital gains tax and extend the definition of long-term capital gains from 1 year to at least 2 to 3 years, so that people would not speculate so much. Now, once that speculation goes away, then investment will begin to flow into banks, investment will begin to flow into the real sector, and therefore employment generation would take place. Speculation in the share market does not generate employment. Hardly any employment is generated. So to increase investment in the economy, we need to have some check on this speculative activity that is huge. And it's a bubble. And when the bubble bursts, a lot of small fries will actually lose money because they will not be able to get out of the market. The rich guys, the big guys, they'll get out of the market. They will get stuck. They will lose a lot of money. I'm already told the ministry and the SEBI has been saying that on these FNPO, a lot of 9 out of 10 are losing. Now, if 9 out of 10 are losing and yet people are investing, then that's a bad signal. So if that happens, then people will stop investing in the capital markets. Then again, we'll be back to what the problem in the 60s and the 70s was, because people get scared of investment in the capital markets. And that again creates problems. So I think we need a more stable policy in all this.
Also, Professor Kumar, the other, from the time I started covering, the market and business as a journalist and investments as a journalist, the government has always keenly advised Indians not to buy gold because it doesn't help in employment generation. That is not money that circulates. We actually lock it in our lockers. But contrary to that, again, the government has cut customs duty on gold and silver by 6%, encouraging perhaps more people to lock away their money in gold and silver. Do you think that was wise?
No, see, gold is an unproductive asset, So therefore, we should discourage investment in gold and jewelry and so on and so forth. A government should actually not worry too much about this customs duty, because there's smuggling that takes place when you have a higher duty on gold, right? But I think that's small compared to what loss of savings is when we import, because we only produce maybe half a ton of gold. The rest of the about 800 tons is imported, of which about 300 tons is smuggled in, and the rest is coming in legally. So we should not worry too much about this, and we should really think about how to generate more savings. I must go now. I have to go for another program.
Before I let you go, Professor Kumar, thank you so much for joining us. Joining us right now is Jayati Ghosh. If you want to say hello to each other, I know that.
Yeah. Hi.
All right,
Okay.
Professor Kumar,
thanks a lot.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. One of my favorite economists, Professor Jayati Ghosh, joins me right now. She'll never mince words or hold back a punch. This has been a very interesting budget, because there was this budget is different from the previous ones. This is a coalition government. They have to make sure that their coalition partners are happy, and we saw a large chunk of that happening. And they also have to sound like nothing has changed from previous years. But we were talking with Professor Kumar about perhaps the lack really of a plan on jobs. Do you see that? Was it myopic and short-sighted in your opinion as well, the work on jobs?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think, to be honest, Faye, I didn't really expect that there would be much that would change in terms of the economic strategy, because they don't really have a vision for employment. They've never thought about employment as a central economic goal. And even the responses on the other big problems, like the rising food prices, the growing hunger that is consequent on it, these have all been short-term knee-jerk responses. The provision of free food for those who were already under the NFSA, rather than thinking of how you can actually ensure food security for the entire population. So these are not issues they have thought about very much. And what they've done, really, they've taken a little bit out of the Congress manifesto in terms of the internship idea. But it is tiny, and the scale that they are offering is so small that it's almost, it's negligible. They have other plans like, they're tiny little droplets in an ocean. So they're unlikely to have any impact at all. They haven't seen the central problem of job creation as something that the government is responsible for. They still clearly think that it's the private sector, the large corporate sector, not the micro, small, and medium enterprises, which is in fact where all the jobs will have to be created. So they've not really got the problem.
So even the internship and the EPFO program that they have launched is for the formal sector.
Exactly.
And the problem really is we have crores and crores of young people coming out of colleges. Yes. You're unable to enter the formal sector at all. Do you, even within rural India, do you think that we're doing enough to solve those problems, or will Manrega and free food, be able to take away some of that pain?
No, because you see, even Manrega, they have underfunded. The allocation is exactly the same as this year's revised estimate. And remember, in this year's revised estimate, that number means depriving West Bengal completely of its rightful quota under MNR. It means not providing many other states with what they have already asked for. It means a huge backlog in terms of what the state governments are owed already for Manrega. So they're not spending more on Manrega. They're not spending more on health. They're not spending more on pensions. They're not spending more on the basic things that would not just ensure quality of life, but increase demand. So we know that a big problem for our economy, and we're talking about employment and inflation, but the corporate sector is not investing. Why? Because there isn't demand in the economy. You have to increase that demand. They're not doing the basic kinds of public spending that would increase demand.
Professor Ghosh, this is for the first time we understand in a breakup of tax collections, personal taxation, which is what individuals are paying the government, actually exceeded corporate tax.
Yes.
So we're actually paying more for the country than what corporate tax is being collected. And it's another conversation on what quality of life we're getting in exchange for this money that we're paying. But in your opinion, and I know that you travel and you study other economies as well, in your opinion, is this a good place to be? Are there any other economies that do this the same way?
Well, the economies that do this are not success stories, unfortunately. So we are really falling in the trap of getting into the worst possible combination of very regressive taxation. And even with the personal income tax, it's a very regressive thing. People think direct taxes are progressive, but our richest people have all kinds of ways of avoiding the tax. And we don't have a wealth tax, which could easily have been put in place. There are so many excellent proposals in the G20. India has agreed to them in the G20. But clearly, the Modi government doesn't think that they have to do that themselves.
So do you see wealth inequality as our biggest problem right now?
Wealth and income inequality is a huge, huge problem and challenge, but it's a symptom of everything else. It's a symptom of the way we haven't created employment generation, the way our fiscal strategies are very unequal and regressive, the way we have denied our people basic public services. So, in other words, the wealth inequality is, I would say, it's a result of these policies. The way we have destroyed informal enterprises and small and medium enterprises for the past decade, there's a blow after blow, demonetization, terrible GST, and the way it's destroyed small enterprises, terrible COVID-19 lockdowns without warning and without compensation. No other country did it like this. We were actually the worst in terms of how we imposed these lockdowns without compensation. And that also destroys the micro and small enterprises.
But Ms. Ghosh, if we consider, what the government has been telling us, that inflation is under control, fiscal deficit is in the comfort zone, that we're building on India for 2047, without too much mention of the India we're living in right now, it seems like the data, the macro data, what we call the large data of the country, seems to be telling us we're okay.
So here's the problem. We have relatively high growth rates, but all the benefits of that growth, or in fact, all the growth is concentrated in maybe the top 15% of the population. You look at the median wage, real wages are stagnant. In fact, the median wage in rural India is falling, for the last decade. You look at, so the macro GDP number doesn't tell us how most of the people are doing. And then we have the fiscal deficit. Yes, it's under control, but it's under control. Why? Because we are underspending on the basic things that would deliver minimal rights, social and economic rights. The reason why we pay our taxes, you and I, Faye, is because we expect that people will get minimum public services. Not just crumbling infrastructure or bridges that collapse overnight and so on, but also basic health, basic education, nutrition, sanitation, all of those things. We are under providing all of that. So what this BJP government has been very good at so far in the last decade is perception management, controlling the narrative. If you get data you don't like, you smash it, you prevent it from being released, or you deny, you blame, you shoot the messengers. If it's a UN agency, you say, no, they're biased and they're wrong. If it's some other independent agency, no, they're colonial. So we deny the reality. And the whole idea is to constantly present this narrative that everything is wonderful. You may not have a job, you may not have enough to eat, but in fact, the economy is doing really well. So it's just your individual problem. But I think that narrative collapsed. I mean, we know that it doesn't work.
There's also this idea of, startup India, that basically we have all of these amazing startups that are doing so well. They're unicorns. They have, billions of dollars in investment. Now the angel tax has been cancelled as well. My concern is the gig economy taking away workers' rights and the ability to unionize. But do you believe that the that the solution could be in our startup sector?
No, because in fact, even that sector is not doing well. They will give you numbers of new startups. They will not tell you how many of the startups that started 3 years ago still exist. And there is a huge problem. The reason they're giving tax incentives to angel investors is because startups are struggling. And that's part of the broader problem. Every single person has to be now an entrepreneur. Every individual who is a graduate of any kind, even in a rural area, is trying to become some kind of a micro entrepreneur. And of course, there is a limited market for these. I mean, you can only have so many influencers, let's say, if in social media, if that's supposed to be a job nowadays.
Yeah.
And so there's a real problem that there is simply not enough employment, whether it is paid employment or self-employment. And so you have to do something that looks at the employment challenge directly.
What is the something that you suggest if you were, writing this budget? What would you have done?
I think there's basically a combination of three things. The first is public employment. Okay, we need dramatically increased public employment of two kinds. One is a dramatically expanded rural employment guarantee that actually provides 100 days to every person, every adult, not just per household, and provides the full 100 days, not 35 days, 40 days, and so on. An urban employment guarantee that also provides employment. And there are many proposals, I've been part of making some of these, that give you the way in which it can be done and the kinds of jobs that you could create. And public employment in these basic services, health, education, sanitation, proper jobs. So not supposedly part-time jobs for Anganwadi workers and helpers and so on, where they don't even get the minimum wage, but proper government employment. Now, if you do that, that has what are called very, very high multiplier effects. In other words, you are employing these people, they will go and spend all that money. They're not going to save it. They will spend it. And therefore, that creates a secondary demand. So the local shops, the local services, they all get a market. So they actually increase. And then there's a multiplier effect of that. In fact, for NREGA, some studies found that the local multiplier effect of spending was 4. That is, you spend 1,000 rupees, you generate demand for 4,000 rupees. It's a sort of bubbling up way of increasing employment. So that's number one. But number two, as I just mentioned, it's the micro, small, and medium enterprises. 85% of our workforce is there. So we have to do something for the micro, small, and medium enterprises. The kind of bashing they have got in the last decade, it's a miracle they survive. So we really have to make sure that they get credit along the lines that the large corporations get it, that they get access to knowledge, technology, inputs, that they get assistance with marketing, the kinds of things we will immediately give the big corporations without thinking.
Yeah. So, in fact, in a conversation that I had with Dr. Raghuram Rajan last year, he suggested in his new book that we're giving these large tax breaks to big organizations to put up semiconductor factories or chip factories where very few people are actually going to get employed. Instead, this money should be deployed in education, in training, in creating skilled workers. And we've launched a Skill India now nearly a decade ago. Has anything come of it?
No, not at all. You see, again, there's such small amounts that are provided, and it's all these little schemes. It's more for show than for actually doing something. But I don't think skilling alone is the solution. You really have to employ these people. There has to be public employment. And I emphasize that doesn't mean all the employment will be public. It will generate secondary employment.
So do you believe also that, the savings, and this is what I was talking to Professor Arun Kumar about before when you joined us, the idea of, Indians who are managing to save right now, there aren't a lot of them because inflation, actual inflation, not the numbers that we're looking at, but actual price of tomatoes is eroding a lot of household savings. But are we doing enough to channel those savings into building infrastructure and investment? Or is it all getting locked up in the stock market and in places that are inefficient?
I think one of the real concerns has been how savings have become very unsafe in India. And it's a real concern for small savers, for the people that we're thinking about, the middle classes who can afford to save a little bit or need to save for their future since we don't have proper pensions and all of that. Because more and more savers are being directed to very unreliable, unsafe, and problematic channels. And it's quite remarkable that the economic survey more or less admits this. The economic survey, in the preface, the chief economic advisor has talked about, first of all, the sea of excess profits that large corporations are swimming in. But in the very next paragraph, he talks about how there is really mis-selling of all of these so-called, financial instruments and insurance products. This is something the government can control. They can regulate these. I mean, it's crazy that he has to complain about it. He's the one who is in charge of actually controlling this.
And as a side effect of the fact that we have very intelligent people in this country who aren't adequately employed, we have a lot of scams. There's a lot of people are losing money because scams through the internet and through telephone. I want to draw your attention also to Bihar and to Andhra Pradesh and the allocations that they have received. Coalition politics. Important to keep the coalition partners happy, I guess. But can any good come of this? Will these two states at least, and Bihar is a large state, will it be able to create the kind of employment that it needs?
So, Faye, this was for me the surprise in this budget. Because let me be honest, I didn't really expect they're going to change strategy because that's not in their DNA. But I expected that Bihar and Andhra Pradesh would actually get a lot. And they've hardly got anything. I mean, Andhra Pradesh has got 15,000 crore for Amravati. That's nothing. That's not even beginning. I mean, I think the plan was 100,000 crore was the original demand that Chandrababu Naidu made. Bihar has got slightly less than that. It's 11,000 crore for some tourism infrastructure and a little bit more here and there, maybe 14,000 crore. This is actually peanuts. And again, it's not clear how much of that will actually go directly to the state, how much of it will be routed through Gujarati contractors, which is pretty much what's happening to infrastructure all over now, including in UP. And certainly it's nothing near what they wanted. So I'm quite surprised at the political, the political audacity that has enabled this.
A slightly more academic, so you actually believe that right now these two allies who had asked for special status didn't get that and then didn't get the money that they had asked for are going to be really upset?
Well, I have no idea. I don't know how these things work. I don't know what deals are being done under the table. These are all very complicated matters. But certainly I would expect that the people of these two states will be disappointed.
We have George in our chat window who has said that brands like Toyota, Suzuki, Maruti, all of these guys have had trouble recently because we've seen in India, in any market that we're talking about, the super luxury products are doing really well, whether that's real estate or cars or clothes or shoes, whatever it is. And then the tail sort of drops off.
Yes.
Because there's no one to buy the two-wheelers. There's no one to buy the entry-level cars. There's no one to buy the one-bedroom houses. Those people are not making enough money. Is this, are we sitting on a time bomb here?
I think we're not sitting on it anymore. It's actually exploding, but it's not one big explosion. We are actually seeing, look at the number of young people who are ripe for even 40 jobs. In any part of the country. Look at the distress of farmers who have been protesting now for more than a decade. Actually, look at the despair that I see among so many young people. Despair and desperation. And then the willingness, because you get cynical about it, to go into all kinds of problematic types of activity. So I think it's already exploding around us, unfortunately, yes.
And finally, you did talk about it a little bit, and this is now a question that's also being sort of debated in the US presidential elections that's currently taking place across on the other side of the world. Do you believe India should be taxing the rich?
Oh, absolutely. There is such a strong case for wealth taxation. There have been estimates done. If you just tax our Indian billionaires 2%, you get you get almost 1% of GDP. Okay, that's double your total health spending, central and state governments put together. If you tax centimillionaires, you get double that amount. And 2% wealth tax, there's nothing. That's like a stock market fluctuation for them. They won't even notice it. So, the idea, and this is an idea that Brazil is pushing in G20. There have been excellent studies by Gabriel Zucman and others. It's a very strong idea in the US. In France, it's been accepted. 6 finance ministers have supported the idea. I am part of an independent commission, which is very much behind the idea. There is a lot of global traction. I find it very interesting that in the UN tax negotiations and in the G20, the Indian government is supporting the idea. It's only within India, when they actually can do something about it, that they suddenly seem to forget about this altogether.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's kind of obvious, right? We talk about crony capitalism. We are living very much in a crony capitalist world. And if you tax the billionaires of India or even the centimillionaires, you know who you'll be taxing.
All right. Professor Jayati Ghosh, thank you so much for spending time with me this evening and answering all of
You're most welcome.
It has been a pleasure, as always, to chat with you. For our audience, please like, share, subscribe, share our videos. You can sign up for our membership as well and support us financially. We're going to bring you as many stories as we can, breaking this down even further, but you got the larger gist of what has happened in the budget from our 2 experts. So for now, thank you for watching.